start my little series on various things that I can teach you, kind of an online tutorial. I'm going to start talking about how I stretch my watercolor paper, which might seem kind of boring, but if you've tried watercolor and you've had the problem of the paper buckling, you're going to love this, because what I'm going to show you is something that I figured out over the years. Starting with the general idea that watercolor paper, well, first of all, you got to use good watercolor paper. I use Arches. Hang on. I just saw this sitting over there. This is just a cutoff. I get it on a roll, and it's tightly wound on the roll. So the only way you can use it is to stretch it. And that's a confusing term because it sounds like you physically have to, stretch the paper. But all it means is that once you cut it off the roll, which is kind of a hard thing, you almost need two people. I actually bolt on a little, like a clothes rack from a closet with two ping pong net end pieces, and I put the roller on that holder, and then I can pull it apart, put some weight on it, and then cut it while it's laying flat. But as soon as you let go of it or take the weight off it, boing, 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 it rolls back up tight. Anyway, you just put it in a tub of water. You can use your actual bathtub, which is a great way to force whoever it is to clean the bathtub. In my case, my kids have the bathroom with the bathtub, and they would never clean it. They would just wait for Dad to stretch his watercolor paper, because then they knew he would clean the tub really good. But now I'm in the basement. This is where I do my work, and I actually got just a big Rubbermaid storage container that's waterproof, and I just fill that just enough to cover the paper. Anyway, a piece like this, if you stick it in water, it'll get limp. It'll expand. The fibers will actually expand just a tiny bit, and after about 20 minutes, maybe at the most 40 minutes, you take it out. You put it on a piece of plywood or something, and you staple it down while it's wet. And while it's laying there on the board, all limp, I take a nice clean sponge with that wet water, the clear, clean water, and I just rub the sponge lightly across it once or twice. That takes off a little extra sizing and also makes sure there's no air bubbles underneath. I might make a video of this, but it's really pretty simple. And then you have to staple it. When you staple it, you're kind of holding it in place in that larger, expanded condition. And then it's going to dry over a period of a few hours, and it'll shrink just a tiny bit. We're talking like a millimeter or two. But that little bit of shrinkage actually tightens it up and keeps it really super flat, which is nice. But more importantly, when you do multiple washes later on, it'll still buckle a little bit, because if you really soak it, it'll buckle, but it always goes back to that super flat condition once it dries, which is completely different than any paper. Even if you're using the really nice, heavy 300-pound paper and you use a lot of water, it'll buckle a little bit, and it'll stay buckled just a little bit. So for me, I decided I don't want to waste money on the 300-pound paper, because it's still going to have a slight buckling problem, unless you don't wet down the paper at all. If all you're using is a dry brush technique, then this doesn't really matter. But if all you're using is dry brush, I don't know how you're getting good painting results, because dry brush is just part of the various components that I think you need to do a good watercolor painting. Okay, so let me talk to you about what I just figured out in the last few months. For years, I used plywood. The benefit of plywood is that, well, it's super sturdy. It's, flat. It doesn't warp, especially if you're not using the really thin plywood, which is not what I was doing. You can see this is, I think this is a 1/2 inch or maybe even like 5/8 plywood. But there's two problems with it. One is it's you have to shellac it or varnish it. You have to seal it so that when you put the watercolor paper on it and it's very wet, soaking wet state, you don't want any of the acids in the wood to come up and soak into the paper, so you have to seal it. So it's kind of a project. You have to go out in the garage and you have to basically treat it like a piece of furniture. It doesn't have to look nice, it just has to be completely sealed. So that's a little bit of a pain, problem number one. But problem number two is, when you put the staples in, you have to use a heavy-duty stapler, like something like this, or even an electric one. And the problem with that is, it's not always a problem, but it's kind of a pain. When you're done with the painting, you got to take all those staples out, obviously. Here's an example of one of my painting boards that I had stapled a large piece of paper to. I wound up not using it as a panoramic, but two square ones. This This painting over here, I just stopped working on it because I didn't like where it was going, so I just left it. And now I can show this to people as an example of a painting in progress. Here's where I finished the painting, and I cut it off the board. When I'm done, though, eventually I got to take all these staples out. Because the plywood holds the staples so well, it's kind of a project. You got to go in here with a needle nose pliers or an awl. You got to dig them out one by one, pull them all out. That's really a pain. The other problem is, using a staple gun like this, they go in really good. In fact, they go in a little too good. That's why they're hard to pull out, but it also is possible. It doesn't always happen, but it's possible that by driving the staples in too hard into this soft paper, I didn't do it with this one, but the potential is there to actually go right through the paper or to tear the paper enough so that when it dries, it actually tears, and the whole purpose of stapling and holding it in place goes out the window because now your paper is torn and it just, you got to start all over again. So what I like to use is a good quality but missing the bottom part. So this is a swing line stapler. I went and got the most expensive one because I was frustrated by using this overly heavy one and trying to pull them out and it being too harsh, too heavy duty. So I got a good quality regular stapler. It's all metal, and I'm going like this, and so the stapling isn't as heavy duty. It doesn't go in and hold so firmly. After doing this plywood thing for years and years, I decided I would try a couple of things new. I took just plain old pieces of foam board. You can see this is 3 pieces, and then I used that heavy duty packaging tape, or what do they call it? Long-term storage tape. It's just like regular tape from a tape gun, you know, the wide kind, but it says for moving and storage. It's basically meant to last a long time without coming undone. And so I just put it all around the foam board. I think I glued these pieces together. I don't even remember. And then I taped the outside on both sides. Even if I'm only going to use one side, when I staple the paper to it, which is what you can see here, this is a piece where I stapled paper to the foam board, just a small one. There's going to be a little bit of tension pulling this way because the paper, remember, it was expanded just a millimeter or two, and then you staple it, and now when it dries, it's going to be pulling. So there's always a need for tension on the back side of whatever board you're using. Okay, so this worked okay. It didn't work too bad. The problem with it was, one, the surface of the foam core is a little bit soft, and I don't know if you can see this in this video, but it creates little dents. When I would staple in, I would actually create little dents on the outside edge, and those indentations would basically make the paper kind of do this on the outside. Not a big deal, but it kind of makes me wonder if when I try to reuse these boards, those little dents will show up underneath somehow, or it'll be a problem. But more importantly than that problem was, and well, the other thing is, because I have all this tape going across, it does have the potential to create tiny little high and low points, which with wet paper going across it, those little high and low points might make it just a little bit less than perfectly flat, especially if you're using 140-pound paper. But the real problem, the problem I thought was more of a problem than any of the other ones, was it wasn't quite as sturdy as I would like. If you look at this and I put some tension on it, it does flex a little bit. In order to take that flexing away, you'd have to use either more foam board, make it even thicker, or you could use gator board. Gator board is much, much stronger than foam board. It looks the same. It's actually the same thickness, but it has wood fiber instead of just paper. So gator board is a much better product, but it's more expensive. It's like, I don't know, 5 times more expensive than foam board. And when I made these things, I had lots of foam board scraps. So the other problem that I found was that the staples go into the paper real easy. That's good, but it's also bad because the staples can have a tendency to actually start to pull out. Remember, there's going to be a little bit of tension as the paper dries, maybe even not the first time, but as you're painting and it dries again, it's going to want to pull out. And you can see with this one, this was just some, I was in my last workshop, I was just using this to show some techniques. But the paper actually is pulling on these staples, so I had to put 1,000,000 staples just to keep it from coming undone. Okay, so after I did my last workshop, or maybe the workshop before that, just a couple months ago, I said, you know, this is really dumb. I've been doing this for over 25 years. I don't like the plywood. I don't really like the foam board. I even tried using this super thick corrugated cardboard, and it was about the same as the foam board. The staples go in real easy. I just put tape over it, but it's a little bumpy, it's a little too soft. The staples don't hold real well because they're gripping onto the outside thin piece of paper. So then I took one of my pieces of plywood after I was frustrated, thinking I got to come up with something new. I said, well, what if I took the plywood and I just glued a piece of double thick mat board to the top? I tried that. I tried to put a staple through, and it still was going in with great difficulty, which means it would also come out with great difficulty. So then I put a piece of foam board on top of the mat board. Then I thought, well, now I'm going to have the same problem. The foam board surface is too soft. So then I glued another piece of double thick mat board. And then after I did that, I realized, well, this thing is stiff enough. It doesn't have to have the plywood at all. Why don't I just take a couple pieces of foam core, sandwich them between the double thick mat board? So I started experimenting, and I kind of went overboard, because you'll see over here, I've got almost 20 different boards that I made. This is kind of the best example of the simplest way. This is just two pieces of regular plain old foam board. Yeah, you can get it anywhere. You might even know someone who does framing, and they have some scraps and cutoffs, and you can use those if you don't need the real big ones. Anyway, I used a lot of Elmer's glue. I bought it in the big jug. Elmer's glue works great. It's really inexpensive if you buy the big jug. I glued the foam board together, then I glued the mat board. I mean, I'm talking about a total covering of glue. Then I put it under weight, or you could use C-clamps with a couple of boards and just squeeze it together. And it's incredibly stiff, incredibly stiff. And because it's got the mat board, in this case double thick mat board on the outside, that means it'll hold the staples really well. They won't have any chance of being pulled out by the tension, but at the same time they'll be relatively easy to take out with just a needle nose pliers or an awl. You won't have to really pull on them very hard to pull them out. So it's a good compromise between being holding the staples firm enough but not so firm that it's a giant project taking the staples out when you're done. The only thing I had to do after I glued it all was I had to spray it so that it would be waterproof. I thought about putting the tape around the outside, and I thought, I don't want to do that. It's too cheap, and again, it's a little bit bumpy. So I got this, I'll show you. Here's the can over here. This was something I got from Menards. Any hardware store would have something like this. This is Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch Gloss Clear. Seals, protects, and revitalizes. I didn't really need to revitalize anything, but I just wanted to seal it so that the water wouldn't soak in and wouldn't make it soggy and break down its strength. So if I pour water on this, it'll just roll right off. I did have to use a lot of this. I think one medium-sized board wound up using like a whole can because I did a couple of layers. So let me show you some examples of the other things that I tried. This is the same thing. This is the double thick foam board, double thick mat board with a foam board, two pieces of foam board in between. In this case, a friend of mine had some signage type foam board, which has already got a waterproof coating. It's a little bit thicker on the outside. I'm pretty sure this is what they use for some kind of signage that would have vinyl letters attached. I'm not even sure, but it's definitely heavier. The outside coating is heavier and more waterproof than a regular foam board. So I tried that. I actually put a piece of masonite in between, then regular foam board, and then the double thick mat board. The problem is it has a little bit of a warp to it because the tension wasn't the same on either side. So I gave up on that idea, but I did use up some of that weird kind of foam board I had. Another thing that I had some scraps of was this super thick, I don't know if this is gator board or it's something else, but it's for signage again. And it's I think it's like a 1/2 inch thick foam. And just by itself, it's really sturdy. It's actually amazing how sturdy it is. So all you need is one of these. If you know somebody who has a sign shop and they have scraps of this, get on their good side, see if they'll give you some scraps, and you won't have to pay for anything. And then just glue foam board on either side. And what you'll have would be something like this. This thing is so strong, it's just crazy. I mean, you literally can't bend it hardly at all. So in this case, this isn't mat board on either side. It's just regular thick cardboard that I happen to have scraps of. Here's an example. It's thicker than regular mat board. And just glued the heck out of it, attached it with some weight or with some clamps, and then I sprayed it a bunch so that it would be waterproof. This is a really good one. If you can find this really thick foam, I highly recommend it. Let me see if there's something else I'm forgetting here. Oh, here's one where I put masonite on the bottom. This is just a black masonite from, I think, some picture frame poster thing. One piece of foam board, one piece of mat board, sprayed it, It's really sturdy, but I can't use the back side. I can only use the top side, which seems to be working okay, even though the tension is a little different. It's a little bit warped because of the tension, but not enough to really matter. Here's one where I had masonite in the middle, foam board, double thick mat board, foam board, double thick mat board. I don't think I really even needed the masonite. The masonite was not really adding to anything. Here's again the formula that works really good. 2 pieces of foam board, and then outside with either mat board or even better, double thick mat board, or just thick cardboard. Here's one with masonite. Oh, here's what I was going to show you. If you can get gator board is also used for signage. And if you know somebody has a frame shop, a sign shop, a printing place that does signage, this is what gator board looks like when it's just one piece. It looks the same as foam board and the thickness of it. This one had a sign for a trade show or something. And if you compare it to regular foam board, it's a lot stiffer. So just one piece of this, even though it's thin, one piece with mat board on either side will get you all the strength you need. Let's see if I have one of those here. Huh, I thought I did. Anyway, it's somewhere around here. I got lots of stuff all over the place. If you want it to be over the top, you would use 2 pieces of gator board and 2 pieces of mat board. Always use 2 pieces of mat board. There goes the stupid dog barking upstairs. Okay, I'm going to pause this for a second.